Hello YouTube, my name's Dave and thanks for checking out my channel, PA Trail Riders. Unfortunately I haven't posted a video here in quite a while because frankly I haven't ridden any trails in quite a while. But it got me thinking today about how much I miss riding, how much I can't wait to get back to it, how much I love it, but also about how I got started. Motorcycles were a big part of my life very early on. They became less so as I went on. A lot of my life I didn't ride motorcycles. Once motorcycles became a part of my life again, it was evident that this was something that I needed to have in my life permanently. So this video is going to be in two parts. The first part is just a photo montage, some photos that we have here, in our family photo albums and whatnot that sort of show how I was exposed to motorcycles in my early life and some of my commentary about that stuff. So the second part of the video is just going to be a list of the motorcycles that I've owned in my life, from my first up until the ones that I have now. It's a relatively small list, so it shouldn't take too long, and I'll add some commentary over that. It's always fun to reminisce about the bikes. So this is me when I was brand new, 1977, on a black Husky 390. Ultimately, it was my first exposure to a motorcycle. Can't get much better than that, I don't think. This is my own little Husky 390 that my dad made for me. You see the Husqvarna sticker there on the very front. It's funny because every bike I ever had was made up to look like a motorcycle, with a front fender and a rear fender and a number plate. Here's me a few years later when I was about 6. Even the frame is painted Husky blue, so. Unfortunately, my dad's riding career was mostly over by the time I was born, but it was ever present. There were pictures of him everywhere, and we had so many trophies we didn't know what to do with them. So here's one of only 2 trophies that we have left in the house after all these years. I don't know whether this trophy had significance to Dad. I have to imagine that it did, given that it survived this long. The only thing I can think of that it might be one of his first trophies. This is from 1973. It was pretty early on. And here's the photo that's in that frame all these years later. It's hard to tell in these photos, but Dad really was not very big. He was only about 5'9", 135 pounds. You'll notice the jacket that he's wearing on the sleeves. It says Team Bond, and that's referring to Ron Bond. He's a legend of the sport that I don't think very many people know about. So this photo is of members of the 1973 International 6 Days Trials team. There's Ron in the middle. He's a big guy. He's 6'2", 6'3". But notice also who's in this photo with him. On the left there, that's Dick Burleson before he started winning all those championships. And on the right there, that's Malcolm Smith. So both of these guys ultimately would end up in the AMA Hall of Fame. And here are a couple photos of bikes that these 2 guys made famous that are on display at the Hall of Fame. So this guy Ron Bond, not only does he go on to win a silver vase on this 1973 trophy team, 3 years earlier he was the 1970 AMA National Enduro Champion. So this guy's got a pedigree, and my dad was associated with him throughout the 70s. Fast forward a couple years, this photo was taken in 1975 at the Little Harpeth 100 AMA National Enduro event. And this is Dad on a 175 Penton, which he actually rode to a victory in his class. I never discussed it with him, unfortunately, but I think 1975 is the year Dad started believing that he could compete on a national level. I actually managed to find a couple photos from this race online. These guys are the weekend warriors. These are not the pro riders. Pro riders do not get themselves stuck in mud holes like that. When I was a few years old, Dad started to take me on his practice rides in the morning and the evening, set me up on the front of this bike, tell me to hold on, and he would not hold back. He even used to take my brother and I on rides on his street bikes. Let me tell you, it was one hell of a thrill for a little kid. Unfortunately, those days were pretty short-lived, because what I didn't know at the time was that my dad had really suffered some bad injuries during his racing career, particularly to his knees. So just as I was getting to the age where people normally get their kids into riding, my dad was coming to the end of his riding days. He was injured, he was in constant pain, and my mother, having seen all this, surely was not going to let her kids get on a motorcycle. In 1983, when I was 6 years old, we moved away from Pittsburgh, and that's pretty much where any motorcycle dreams ended for me. Then in 1986, there was a glimmer of hope in the form of this pile. I had no idea at the time, but what we actually had was this. This is the 1970 Kawasaki 75 MT, which in its day was pretty cool. The one we had definitely seen better days, but to me it was at least a glimmer of hope that motorcycles were not gone forever. So amazingly, I was able to find some video of this bike, and it confirmed my memory is correct. This thing is loud as fuck. I have 2 really lasting memories of this bike. First is how loud it was. I couldn't believe how loud it was. The neighbors couldn't either. And secondly, I ended up crashing this bike into the fence at the end of the street. If you ever meet my brother, he's more than willing to tell you every detail of that story. So even though we had this bike, and my brother had a little Honda mini bike as well, it looked something like this. It wasn't this one, but it was something like this. Ultimately, the bikes weren't really safe to ride anywhere other than up and down the street, and the neighbors were really annoyed by them, so they quickly went away, and that really was the end of motorcycling for me as a child. So it would be another 21 years in 2008 before I would have another bike, which was this one. It's a 1988 BMW K75S. It's an inline 3-cylinder 750cc. I think I paid $3,700 for this bike at the time, and it had maybe 55,000 some miles on it. It was a good bike, and I enjoyed riding it. The lasting memory I have of it though is how heavy it was. I sold it to a gentleman from Georgia who flew to Pennsylvania and rode it home. In 2011, I learned that you could buy a brand new motorcycle for less than $4,500. That happened to be this 2011 Kawasaki Ninja 250R. I ordered a black one, but demand was high for these, and the dealership only got this special edition, which I liked. It had a lot of graphics on it that were sparkly and whatnot, which was not my personality, but you couldn't really see them unless the sun was shining on it really brightly. It was nice to have a bike to ride, but I can't say I really enjoyed this bike a whole lot. It had 26 horsepower. It was basically a turd. Here's a glimpse at what all 26 horsepower look like when you're really getting on it. And notice how high this bike revs. It redlines at 12,500 RPM. I was always very light on the clutch at really high RPMs. I was worried about blowing it up. It also had a really annoying vibration at any speed over 45 miles per hour. After a long ride, I'd get off that bike and I could still feel the frequency of that vibration in my body. It was so strange. I wasn't really riding anymore, so I decided to sell the bike to a guy who was trying to get his wife into riding. Street bikes were fun to a certain point, but I never really had any dreams about street bikes. My dreams were always about dirt bikes. I'm going to make a separate video about my first actual dirt bike ride, but for now I'm just going to cut to the chase and show you the dirt bike that I ended up buying. This is a 2002 Yamaha YZ125. I bought this bike for $1,800 and just rode it as it was for an entire season. When I finally did get to the point where it was torn down, I found that the rear suspension was almost completely seized and that this bike needed a lot of little things to get to the point where I felt safe riding it. Let's take a look at some of the really good times I've had on this bike. Alrighty then. Alright. After hearing so much about how all the top hard enduro riders came from a trials background, I thought maybe getting a trials bike would be a good idea to help me refine my techniques and just become a better rider overall. So in 2018, I found this 2013 Sherco 3.0 ST trials bike. I bought this bike from a shop owner in Maryland for $3,750. He told me he pulled it out of a storage container on someone's property a few years earlier. This video is from the day when I got everything back together after just going through the whole bike to make sure it was in as good a shape as possible, and it took me about an hour to be able to balance the bike like this, which I thought was pretty good. And maybe it is, but sadly I haven't made much progress from here. And it was only until the second ride when it almost got away from me. I was trying to do some wheelies here, but I still haven't gotten the hang of that whole rear brake thing. Regardless, I have to say that I really enjoy the process of learning how to ride this bike, and it definitely is going to be an ongoing process. Fare better another day, I hope. So there you have it, my world of motorcycles from the beginning. I'm really hopeful that in the coming years, there'll be lots more motorcycle adventures to share with you. And maybe it'll inspire you to put together some of your own videos. I'd love to see where your motorcycle journey began and what you're up to right now. Thanks very much for watching.